The atmosphere at the international airport was a symphony of mundane chaos. The rhythmic rolling of suitcases, the muffled announcements of departing flights, and the low hum of 1,000 private conversations. In the center of this bustling hive stood Rex, a German shepherd whose reputation preceded him. Clad in a black tactical vest with "Police" emblazoned in silver, Rex was the embodiment of discipline. His ears were perked, his nose twitching as he filtered through a sea of scents: expensive perfume, stale coffee, and the metallic tang of jet fuel. Beside him stood Officer Daniel, a man whose steady hand on the leash reflected a decade of shared missions and unspoken trust. To the world, they were a wall of security. To the criminals of the city, they were an inescapable shadow. But in a heartbeat, the symphony shattered. Without a growl of warning, Rex's body coiled like a high-tension spring. A thunderous, guttural bark ripped through the terminal, a sound so violent it seemed to vibrate the very glass walls. Before Daniel could tighten his grip, Rex lunged. He wasn't chasing a stray scent or a hidden suitcase. He was a furry missile aimed directly at a small, fragile target. Panic erupted instantly. Screams echoed as travelers scattered, diving out of the way of the charging beast. Daniel felt the leather leash sear his palm as he struggled to restrain his partner, his heart hammering against his ribs. "Rex, heel," he roared, but for the first time in 5 years, the dog ignored him. At the end of Rex's path stood a 6-year-old girl, her face pale as porcelain, clutching the hand of a woman who looked more annoyed than frightened. As the massive dog bore down on her, the girl didn't scream. She didn't run. Instead, her eyes locked onto Rex's with an intensity that was hauntingly mature. In a movement so subtle it was almost invisible to the panicked crowd, she lifted her left hand and tapped her right sleeve once, twice, 3 times. It was a rhythmic, deliberate gesture. To any bystander, it looked like a nervous tick of a terrified child. But to Rex, it was a flare launched into a dark sky. It was a distress signal, a silent cry for help, in a code that only a creature with his primal instincts could truly decipher. "Stop him! He's going to kill her!" the woman beside the girl shrieked, her voice thin and piercing. Daniel finally managed to throw his weight back, hauling Rex into a strained sit, though the dog continued to snarl, his gaze never wavering from the girl's sleeve. The air was thick with tension. Security guards were already drawing their tasers, and the crowd was filming the rogue police dog on their phones. Daniel looked at Rex, then at the trembling child. He saw the girl's lips move not in a scream, but in a silent, mouthed word that chilled him to the bone. This wasn't a random act of aggression. This was a rescue mission that had only just begun. Call to action. What would you do if your life depended on the instincts of a dog when everyone else thought he was the monster? Today, we dive into a story of hidden signals, a desperate child, and a bond that transcends human language. This is the story of Officer Daniel and his partner Rex, and the day an airport scuffle turned into a race against a shadow organization. You won't want to miss a single second of this. Before we reveal the secret behind those 3 taps, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to join our community of mystery seekers. Now, let's find out what Rex really saw. Daniel and Rex were more than just a team. They were a legend in the department. Rex had found missing children in frozen forests and sniffed out explosives in the most crowded stadiums. Daniel knew every twitch of Rex's tail, every nuance of his bark. But as they were hurried away from the terminal by airport security, Daniel felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. He knew Rex wasn't going rogue. He knew the dog had seen something, or someone, that shouldn't have been there. The way the girl had looked at them, it wasn't fear of the dog. It was the desperate hope of someone who had finally been found. The investigation was about to go from a simple patrol to a deep dive into an urban nightmare. In the heart of this concrete jungle, where shadows often conceal more than the light reveals, one name has become synonymous with relentless justice: Daniel Reyes. Daniel isn't your typical officer. He's a man whose soul seems forged from the very iron and grit of the city he protects. But even the most seasoned veteran has a limit, a blind spot that human senses simply cannot bridge. That is where Rex comes in. Rex isn't just a canine partner. He is a German Shepherd with a gift that borders on the supernatural. He doesn't just track scents, he reads the atmosphere. He can detect the chemical shift in the air when a criminal's pulse quickens. He can literally smell the scent of fear before a weapon is even drawn. The bond between them wasn't born in a training academy. It was baptized in fire. Years ago, during a high-stakes raid on a hijacked warehouse, Daniel found himself cornered, his ammunition spent, and a silent killer lurking in the rafters above. It was Rex than just, a young, unproven recruit who broke formation. Ignoring the chaos of the gunfire, Rex sensed the predatory intent from above. With a primal roar, the dog launched himself through a cloud of debris, taking the hit meant for Daniel and neutralizing the threat in one swift, ferocious motion. That night, as Daniel sat on the cold floor, pressing his hands against Rex's bleeding side until the paramedics arrived, an unspoken pact was sealed. It was no longer a relationship of master and animal. It was a union of two souls who had stared into the abyss and refused to blink. In the modern age of policing, where thermal cameras, AI drones, and biometric scanners are touted as the ultimate tools of the trade, Daniel still puts his ultimate faith in Rex's nose. Why? Because technology can be hacked, jammed, or fooled by a clever enough adversary. But you cannot hack the primordial instinct of a beast that loves you more than its own life. Rex's intuition is a bridge to a world of information that humans have long forgotten how to access. When the air turns cold and the city's heartbeat falters, Daniel doesn't look at a screen. He looks at the tension in Rex's shoulders. If Rex growls, the danger is real. If Rex stays silent, the shadows are just shadows. Together, they are a singular entity, a duo that proves that in the hunt for truth, the most sophisticated sensor ever created is still the beating heart of a loyal partner. The morning at the Metropolitan Airport began like any other holiday rush. The air was a thick soup of overlapping sounds, the rhythmic clatter of thousands of rolling suitcases, the muffled chime of flight announcements, and the frantic whispers of families terrified of missing their gates. It was a symphony of organized chaos, where everyone was a stranger to everyone else, lost in their own private hurry. But amidst this sea of holiday cheer and travel stress, a subtle, invisible tension began to ripple through the air, unnoticed by the human eye, but glaringly obvious to a more primal set of senses. Rex, the veteran canine, stood like a statue carved from granite. Normally, his nose would be dancing, filtering through the scents of expensive perfumes, stale coffee, and the hidden metallic tang of prohibited items. But today, Rex wasn't interested in suitcases or the smell of gunpowder. His entire being was vibrating with a different kind of frequency. His ears were pinned forward, and his gaze was a laser beam, cutting through the crowd to lock onto a single figure. To his handler, it looked like a false alert, but to Rex, every instinct he possessed was screaming that something in the natural order had been broken. His target was a woman in a long navy blue coat. At first glance, she was just another mother traveling with her 3 children, 2 young boys and a small girl. They looked like a typical family on their way to visit relatives. But as Rex watched, the normalcy began to peel away like cheap paint. The woman was moving with a cold, mechanical efficiency. She walked several paces ahead, her strides long and purposeful, never once slowing down for the small legs struggling to keep up behind her. There was no hand-holding, no gentle encouragement, no "stay close, sweetie." The most haunting detail was her total lack of peripheral vision for the children. One of the boys tripped over his own oversized backpack, nearly falling into the path of a luggage cart, yet the woman didn't even flinch. She didn't turn her head. She didn't check to see if they were still there. It wasn't the behavior of a stressed mother. It was the behavior of a predator who had captured its prey and was simply transporting it to a final destination. Rex let out a low, guttural vibration in his chest, a sound that wasn't quite a bark, but a warning. He had sensed the one thing no machine could detect, the complete absence of a soul behind those cold blue eyes. Daniel wasn't just an ordinary traveler. He was a man who lived in the details, a student of human behavior who knew that the truth often hides in the things people forget to fake. As he sat in the terminal, the initial perfect image of the family across from him began to crack under his relentless gaze. It started as a gut feeling, but soon it transformed into a series of cold, hard anomalies that refused to be ignored. He realized he wasn't looking at a family on vacation. He was looking at a poorly rehearsed stage play. The first red flag was their attire. It was a jarring, illogical mosaic of seasons. In the climate-controlled, slightly humid air of the terminal, the eldest boy was swallowed by a heavy winter parka, his face flushed and sweating, yet he made no move to unzip it. Beside him, the young girl shivered in a thin, sleeveless hoodie that looked better suited for a beach than a long-haul flight. They looked like they had been dressed by someone who had grabbed random clothes from a lost and found bin in total darkness. There was no parental touch here, no one checking if they were too hot or too cold. It was a visual dissonance that screamed haste and disorder. Then, Daniel's eyes drifted to their luggage, or rather, the lack of it. Anyone who has ever traveled with children knows the chaos it entails. The colorful backpacks stuffed with half-eaten snacks, the small water bottles, the frayed teddy bears peeking out of side pockets. But this group had none of that. For a family of 4, there was only one massive, ominous black suitcase. It sat there, cold and industrial, like a silent monolith. There were no toys to keep the children occupied, no personal bags for their comfort. They were traveling light, too light. It wasn't the luggage of a family going on a holiday. It was the cargo of people who needed to move fast and leave no trace behind. Daniel leaned back, his mind racing through the psychology of the family mask. Why do the most calculated criminals choose the guise of a perfect family? Because it is the ultimate invisibility cloak. Society is conditioned to see a mother, a father, and children as a unit of safety and morality. We instinctively lower our guard. We stop asking questions. These predators were betting on the world's tendency to look away from the mundane. But as Daniel watched the father place a hand on the boy's shoulder, a grip that looked more like a restraint than an embrace, he knew the mask was slipping. The perfect family was a lie, and the truth hidden behind it was likely darker than anything Daniel had ever encountered. The tension in the air is now so thick it's almost suffocating. While the woman remains preoccupied with her phone call, her voice hushed and hurried, little Emma, the youngest and seemingly most fragile of the group, finds a spark of incredible bravery. She deliberately slows her pace, letting a small gap grow between her and the captor. With her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, she repeats the signal. Tap, 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 tap. It's the silent language of the desperate, a rhythmic plea for help hidden in the simple act of adjusting a sleeve. She isn't just a lost child anymore. She is a beacon in the dark, hoping against hope that the man watching from the shadows is who she thinks he is. That is when Rex breaks the silence. The massive dog doesn't lunge, and he doesn't growl with the low vibration of an impending attack. Instead, he unleashes a series of sharp, urgent barks that cut through the city's ambient noise like a siren. It is a calculated sound, a signal of target identified. Rex's intuition is flawless. He senses the shift in Emma's movement and the spike of adrenaline in the air. His bark isn't just a warning to the woman. It is a clarion call to his master, marking the exact moment where the hunt ends and the confrontation begins. Before the woman can even process the dog's outburst, the shadows ahead of her seem to solidify into a human form. Daniel steps out from the periphery of a flickering streetlight, his silhouette broad and imposing. He doesn't hesitate. With the precision of a seasoned professional, he cuts off her path, forcing her to an abrupt halt. "Ma'am, I need you to stop right there," he says, his voice a low, commanding rumble that leaves no room for argument. He doesn't look at the children yet. His gaze is locked onto the woman, a predator who has finally cornered his prey. The authority radiating from him is absolute, turning the sidewalk into a makeshift interrogation room. The mask of the concerned guardian shatters in an instant. The woman's face pales, the blood draining away to leave a sickly, sallow complexion. Her grip on the phone tightens until her knuckles turn white. Then her hand begins to tremble uncontrollably. The calculated poise she maintained throughout the journey vanishes, replaced by the raw, jagged edges of panic. She looks around frantically, searching for an exit that doesn't exist, her eyes darting from Daniel's cold stare to the snarling dog at her flank. The silence of the children, the barking of the dog, and the sudden appearance of this lawman have woven a net around her, and she finally realizes there is no way out. The air in the terminal thickens as the woman's composure begins to crack. She glances frantically at her watch, her voice rising in a pitch of forced desperation that echoes off the glass walls. "Move aside. My flight leaves in 20 minutes, and I will not miss it because of your incompetence," she shrieks, attempting to shove her way through the narrow gap. But Rex doesn't budge an inch. He stands there, a literal wall of muscle and resolve, his shadow looming over her like an impending storm. The polished floor of the airport reflects the cold, unyielding tension of a predator who has finally cornered its prey. And for the first time, the woman's hurried traveler persona starts to feel like a very thin veil. It's in this moment of friction that Daniel notices the sickening reality hidden beneath the surface. While the woman screams about schedules and rights, her hand is clamped around the little girl's wrist like a steel vice. Her red-tipped fingers dig deep into the child's fragile skin, turning the flesh white and then a bruised, angry purple. The little girl doesn't cry out. She doesn't even whimper. She stands frozen, her face a haunting mask of silent terror, her small body trembling under a pain she has clearly been conditioned to endure. The loving guardian facade isn't just slipping, it is shattering into jagged, dangerous pieces, revealing the predatory malice underneath. Daniel's eyes turn to ice, the last shred of his professional patience evaporating in the heat of his rising anger. He sees the bruise forming on the girl's wrist, and the realization hits him like a physical blow. This isn't just a suspicious traveler. This is a monster hiding in broad daylight. He steps forward, his voice dropping to a low, chilling tone that cuts through the woman's frantic protests like a knife. "Ma'am, your flight is the least of your worries now," he says, his gaze locking onto hers until she finally flinches, her bravado vanishing. "I'm afraid you and the child will have to follow us. We're going to the interrogation room, right now." The game of cat and mouse has ended, and the heavy doors of justice are about to swing shut. The heavy iron door slams shut, sealing them in a space where time feels like it's grinding to a halt. The interrogation room is a vacuum of warmth, lit only by the flickering clinical hum of blue-tinted neon lights. Every shadow seems to stretch longer than it should, pressing against the walls and heightening a suffocating sense of dread. For the woman, the walls are closing in. But for the two boys beside her, the world seems to have stopped existing altogether. But it isn't the cold or the claustrophobia that chills the air. It's the silence. The two boys, who should be clinging to their mother in a moment of such intense crisis, sit like porcelain dolls on the hard bench. They don't cry. They don't whisper. They don't even look at the woman who claims to be their protector. Their bodies are rigid, their gazes fixed on a point in the void, as if their souls have been hollowed out, leaving only mechanical shells behind. They aren't just quiet, they are unnervingly still, as if moving a single muscle might trigger a catastrophe. This isn't just a sign of good behavior, it is a haunting manifestation of the freeze response. In the world of psychological trauma, when a child is exposed to a prolonged, inescapable threat, their nervous system eventually bypasses fight or flight and enters a state of total shutdown. They become invisible within themselves. To the outside observer, they appear calm, but internally, they are paralyzed by a terror so deep that even a breath feels like a risk. These children have learned that the safest way to exist is to not exist at all, to become part of the furniture, invisible to the predator. The woman reaches out, her fingers trembling as she tries to touch the older boy's shoulder, but he doesn't flinch. He doesn't lean into her touch. He doesn't even acknowledge her presence. The disconnect is haunting. In this sterile cage, the supposed bond of motherhood appears not as a source of comfort, but as a chilling performance where the actors have forgotten their lines. The silence in the room grows heavier, thick with the unspoken horrors that have turned these children into statues, leaving us to wonder, what kind of monster could break a child's spirit so completely that they no longer even know how to cry? The atmosphere in the room thickens with the heavy, unspoken tension as Daniel's gaze narrows. He is a man who lives in the details, and right now, a single detail is screaming for his attention. As he leans closer to the small, weathered backpack resting in the corner, his heart skips a beat. It's a child's bag, frayed at the edges and stained by the passage of time. But it's not the wear and tear that catches his breath. It's the two small, hand-stitched letters on the strap. M.L. A cold shiver runs down Daniel's spine as a sharp realization takes hold. Just moments ago, he had glimpsed the name on the woman's elegant leather suitcase. Anderson. The two names don't just clash, they scream a hidden truth. Why would a child belonging to the Anderson family carry a bag marked with entirely different initials? In the world of a seasoned investigator, there are no coincidences, only clues waiting to be unraveled. And this discrepancy is a gaping hole in her story. When Daniel calmly points out the mismatched names, the air seems to flee from the room. The woman's face pales instantly, her composure fracturing like thin ice under sudden heat. It was a gift, she stammers, her voice thin and trembling like a leaf in a storm. A second-hand item we bought at a local market long ago. It's a classic excuse, a shield made of paper, but the way her fingers twitch as she clutches her shawl tells a far more sinister story. She isn't just lying, she is terrified of what those two letters, M.L., truly represent. Beside Daniel, Rex lets out a low, guttural growl that vibrates through the old floorboards. The dog's instincts are razor-sharp. He can sense the sour, metallic scent of fear and deceit radiating off her. Rex's eyes never leave the woman, his body coiled like a spring ready to snap. The woman's eyes dart toward the dog, then back to Daniel, the sweat glistening on her forehead despite the chill in the air. The mask of a grieving mother is slipping, and beneath it lies a web of secrets that the name Anderson was never meant to cover. Every beat of silence in the room feels like a ticking clock, counting down to the moment the truth finally explodes. The air in the room suddenly turns heavy, thick with a suffocating silence that feels like the calm before a devastating storm. As the tension reaches a breaking point, Rex, the loyal guardian who has seen the darkness hidden behind closed doors, moves with a silent, purposeful grace. He doesn't bark, he doesn't attack. Instead, he approaches the trembling Emma and gently rests his massive head on her tiny lap. It is a gesture of pure, wordless reassurance, a silent vow that for the first time in a long time, she is no longer alone in her fear. The dog's warmth seems to give the fragile girl the strength she has been searching for, grounding her in a world that has felt like a shifting nightmare. Daniel kneels down, his heart hammering against his ribs, sensing that the truth is hovering on the edge of a precipice. Emma's small hand reaches out, gripping his sleeve with a desperate, white-knuckled intensity. She leans in, her breath shaky, and whispers a sentence that shatters the room's remaining peace into 1,000 jagged pieces. "Please, please don't let her take us back," she sobs, her voice a fragile thread of agony. "She's not who you think she is. She isn't our mother." The words hit Daniel like a physical blow, a chilling revelation that turns his blood to ice and reframes every single detail of the investigation into something far more sinister. The reaction is instantaneous. The woman, who until now had played the role of the grieving, frantic parent, lets out a piercing, animalistic shriek of denial. Her face contorts, the mask of maternal concern melting away to reveal a jagged edge of pure, unadulterated panic. She lunges forward, her hands outstretched as if to reclaim her prize. But Rex is faster. A low, guttural growl erupts from deep within the dog's chest, a sound of primal warning that vibrates through the floorboards. He stands as an unbreakable barrier of fur and muscle, forcing the woman back until she is pinned against the cold corner of the wall. In that moment, as she snarls and screams at the shadows, the horrifying truth is laid bare. The monster wasn't lurking under the bed. She was standing right in front of them all along. The atmosphere in the surveillance hub was thick with a heavy, suffocating silence as Daniel's colleagues worked with feverish intensity. There was no time for bureaucratic delays. Every second lost was a mile further the predator could travel. They began the express investigation, systematically extracting high-definition footage from the hospital's strategic points, gates A, B, and D. As the digital reels began to spin, the grainy images flickered to life, revealing a truth so calculated and cold-blooded that it sent a shiver down the spine of every veteran officer in the room. This wasn't just a series of disappearances. It was a flawlessly executed stage play where the victims were the only ones who didn't know their roles. The footage revealed the mysterious woman moving through the crowded halls, not like a fugitive, but like a ghost who owned the space. She didn't hide in the shadows. She operated in the blinding light of the public eye. The team watched in horror as the scripted kidnapping unfolded across different timestamps. At Gate A, she approached an elderly couple, the grandparents of the first child. With a gentle touch on the shoulder and a face masked by feigned concern, she whispered a lie so convincing they handed over the child without a second thought, believing she was a medical staff member taking the boy for a routine procedure. The manipulation was surgical. At Gate B, the scene was even more heartbreaking. A father, overwhelmed by the stress of his child's illness and buried in a frantic work call, became the unwitting accomplice to his own nightmare. The woman waited for the exact moment his attention wavered. She didn't snatch the child. She lured the little girl away with a toy and a smile, acting so naturally that bystanders assumed she was the mother or an aunt. She exploited the bystander effect to its fullest, knowing that in a sea of people, no one truly looks at what is happening right in front of them if it appears normal. As Daniel analyzed the patterns, the terrifying brilliance of her public kidnapping tactic became clear. She used the chaos of the hospital, the grief, the exhaustion, and the distractions of modern life as her primary weapon. She didn't need a dark alley or a weapon. She needed only a few seconds of human lapse. By the time the footage reached Gate D, the woman had already vanished into the urban labyrinth with 3 children. The realization hit the team like a physical blow. They weren't dealing with a desperate amateur, but a predator who understood the mechanics of trust and the vulnerabilities of the human heart better than anyone they had ever hunted. As the interrogation light flickers, the truth begins to unravel, revealing a darkness far deeper than a single kidnapping. The detectives soon realize they aren't just dealing with a lone criminal or a momentary lapse in security. They have stumbled upon the jagged edge of a massive, chilling iceberg. This wasn't the crime of opportunity, it was a calculated operation. The evidence points to a sophisticated, transnational criminal network that treats human lives like untraceable commodities, moving through the veins of global travel with terrifying ease. The woman in the beige coat was no amateur. She was a professional ghost within a specialized wing of the underworld. Her role was part of a sinister, fake family protocol. These traffickers don't just snatch children. They manufacture entire identities for them. With high-quality forged birth certificates, doctored passports, and coordinated outfits, they blend into the sea of travelers. They exploit the mundane appearance of a mother and child to bypass the most stringent security checks, turning the world's busiest transit hubs into their personal corridors for human smuggling. Investigations into her digital footprint reveal a haunting pattern. This woman had dozens of faces and even more names. To the cameras in Singapore, she was a grieving widow traveling with her son. In Dubai, she was a wealthy aunt on a shopping trip. She was a master of the gray zone, that psychological space in airports where everyone is a stranger and no one asks questions. She knew exactly how to trigger the bystander effect, ensuring that even if a child looked uncomfortable, onlookers would simply assume it was a typical family tantrum rather than a life-altering crime. The scale of the network was staggering, stretching across borders and oceans. This was a dark logistics company where children were referred to as cargo and packages. They relied on the split-second distractions of modern life, a phone notification, a dropped boarding pass, or the exhaustion of a long layover to strike. Once a child was pulled into their web, their original identity was erased within hours, replaced by a paper trail that led to nowhere, making the task of recovery an almost impossible nightmare for local authorities. This revelation serves as a chilling wake-up call for every parent navigating the chaos of modern travel. These predators do not lurk in the shadows. They operate in the bright fluorescent glare of our most public spaces. They look like fellow travelers, harried parents, or friendly strangers. It is a haunting reminder that in the heart of a crowd, our greatest vulnerability is our assumption of safety. Vigilance is the only shield we have left when the person standing next to you might be a cog in a machine designed to make the innocent disappear forever. The heavy silence of the hospital's family waiting wing is suddenly shattered by the frantic sound of boots skidding on linoleum. The doors fly open with a violent thud as the father of the two young boys, his face a mask of agony and sleeplessness, stumbles into the room. Behind him, Emma's grandparents, their faces pale and aged by 10 years in a single night, rush in, their breath catching in their throats. For hours they had lived in a waking nightmare, staring into the abyss of a world without their children. But as they cross the threshold, the cold grip of terror is instantly replaced by a wave of overwhelming, blinding relief. The air in the room thickens with the sound of raw, unfiltered human emotion. There are no words, only the guttural rhythmic sobbing of a father who thought he had lost his entire world. He collapses to his knees, pulling his two sons into a crushing embrace, burying his face in their hair as if to convince himself they are truly made of flesh and bone. The grandparents fall beside them, their trembling hands reaching out to touch Emma's face, tracing her features through a veil of tears. It is a symphony of sobs and whispered prayers, a moment where the ticking clock finally stops and the shadows of the past few days are washed away by the sheer force of love. In the center of this emotional whirlwind stands the one who made it all possible. Rex, the silent guardian, watches the scene with calm, soulful eyes, his tail giving a slow, weary wag. Despite his own exhaustion and the wounds he sustained, he remains a pillar of strength. Emma, breaking away from her grandmother's embrace for a moment, crawls toward the great dog. She reaches out, her small hands disappearing into his thick fur, and wraps her arms tightly around his neck. "You did it, Rex," she whispers, her voice cracking with a mixture of exhaustion and adoration. "You're my hero. You brought us home." The room, once a cold chamber of waiting and anxiety, is now transformed into a sanctuary of peace. As the families huddle together, the trauma of the dark forest and the clutches of their captors begin to recede, replaced by the warmth of being whole again. They are no longer victims, they are survivors, brought back from the edge of darkness by a bond that transcends species. As the sun begins to set, casting long golden shadows across the floor, the realization sinks in. The nightmare is over, and the hero who led them through the valley of death is finally resting at their feet, his mission complete. The silence that followed the dog's sudden intervention was finally broken, not by a scream, but by a whisper that chilled the bones of everyone in the room. As the investigators knelt beside Emma, she finally revealed the origin of that mysterious 3-tap signal. It wasn't a game, nor was it a random gesture of fear. It was a secret language, a final gift from a man who was no longer there to protect her. Emma's father, it turned out, was not just an ordinary man. He was a legendary canine trainer for the elite police units, a man who spent his life bonding with the most disciplined animals on the force before his untimely passing. He had always told her, "Emma, humans are complicated. Sometimes they don't listen, and sometimes they can't understand the danger you're in. But the dogs, the ones I train, they never miss a beat." He had spent years teaching her the silent distress code. He knew that in a world full of predators, a child's voice could easily be silenced. But a trained animal's instinct is a force of nature. That 3-tap rhythm was the universal command for immediate threat, protect the handler, a signal so deeply ingrained in the police dog's DNA that they would react even before their human partners realized what was happening. This silent signal was the last lesson Emma's father ever gave her. It was a legacy of survival, a bridge built from the past to save her in a future where he could no longer hold her hand. When the kidnappers thought they had stripped her of everything, her home, her safety, her voice, they didn't realize she carried a weapon they couldn't see. She wasn't just a victim, she was the daughter of a guardian, using a dead man's wisdom to call upon a living shield. The 3 taps weren't just a plea for help, they were a command for justice delivered from beyond the grave. Looking at this, we realize a profound truth. The greatest inheritance a parent can leave is not wealth or property, but the knowledge and skills to survive the darkest nights. Emma didn't survive by luck. She survived because she was prepared. This moment serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of life skills for children. In a split second of terror, it wasn't a superhero that saved Emma, but the echoes of her father's voice and the discipline of a loyal animal. The three-tap signal stands as a testament to a father's love. Love so strong it could reach back from the shadows of death to pull his daughter back into the light. The sirens finally fade into the rhythmic pulse of justice. The woman, who once hid her predatory nature behind a mask of ordinary indifference, is led away in cold steel handcuffs. Her gaze, once sharp and calculating, is now hollow as the weight of her crimes collapses upon her. The police didn't just catch a kidnapper. They dismantled a shadow network that had haunted the city's outskirts for years. Every locked door was kicked open, every hidden trail was exposed, and the dark machinery of her crime ring was ground to a permanent halt. The nightmare that had gripped the hearts of many families was finally over, silenced by the relentless pursuit of a man and his dog. Weeks later, the city gathered to honor its heroes. Under the warm glow of the auditorium spotlights, Daniel stood tall in his dress uniform, the gold medal on his chest catching the light. Beside him, Rex sat with regal poise, an honorary ribbon tied to his collar, his ears pricked and his tail occasionally thumping the floor. The applause was deafening, a roar of gratitude from a community that could finally sleep in peace. But as the cameras flashed and officials spoke of bravery and duty, Daniel didn't look at the crowd. He looked down at Rex, and then at the front row, where the children they had rescued sat safely in their parents' arms. To them, the shiny medal was nothing compared to the sight of those families being whole again. That was the only reward that truly mattered. This journey reminds us of a truth we often forget in the noise of our modern lives. Never silence your intuition, and never underestimate the soul of an animal. Rex didn't need words to tell a story of danger. He used his heart, his senses, and an unbreakable loyalty to a man who chose to listen. There is a primal, honest connection between us and our four-legged companions, a bond that sees through lies and senses the shadows we might miss. In the end, it wasn't just professional training that saved those lives. It was the pure, instinctive love of a dog who refused to let evil win. As Daniel and Rex walk back into the quiet rhythm of their lives, we are left to wonder about the mysteries that surround us every day. Have you ever noticed your pet reacting to something or someone that seemed perfectly normal to you? Have you ever seen them sense a truth that you couldn't quite grasp? Tell us your stories in the comments below. And if you're ready for more, don't go anywhere. Stay tuned for our next video, where Rex faces his most chilling challenge yet, a cold case that has remained unsolved for a decade, until a single scent changes everything. Click the video on your screen now to follow Rex into his next legendary investigation. The rain doesn't just fall in this city, it washes away the sins of the elite while drowning the cries of the forgotten. Our protagonist stands on the precipice of the truth, his breath hitching in the cold night air. Every step, every betrayal, and every blood-stained clue has led him here to the roof of the very empire that thought it was untouchable. He isn't just looking for a killer anymore. He's looking for the soul of a city that sold itself to the highest bidder. The silence up here is deafening, broken only by the rhythmic hum of the neon signs and the heavy thud of his own heart. And there he is, the architect of the chaos. Not a monster hiding in the sewers, but a titan of industry, sitting in a throne of glass. He doesn't reach for a weapon, he offers a drink. This is the chilling reality of our story's climax. The ultimate villain doesn't believe he's evil. To him, the lives ruined and the bodies buried were just necessary overhead for progress. As he speaks, his voice is as smooth as silk and as cold as the grave, laying out a logic so twisted yet so structurally sound that it makes you question the very foundation of justice. But our detective has a weapon that the mastermind didn't account for: a memory. He pulls out the cracked pocket watch, a relic from the first victim that started this spiral. It's a symbol of the small people the villain deemed insignificant. In this moment, the narrative shifts from a high-stakes thriller to a deeply personal vendetta. The air grows thick with tension as the truth is finally barked out, not as a plea for mercy, but as a death sentence for a corrupt legacy. The mastermind's composure finally cracks. The mask of the sophisticated billionaire slipping to reveal the coward hiding beneath. The confrontation explodes into a raw, unchoreographed struggle for survival. No flashy gadgets, no miraculous rescues, just two men fighting in the mud and the rain for the right to define the future. It's a brutal, visceral sequence that mirrors the internal conflict of the entire series. Can light truly exist without being swallowed by the dark? As they teeter on the edge of the abyss, you'll find yourself holding your breath, realizing that in this world, winning often comes with a price that no one is truly ready to pay. As the sun breaks through the smog of the city for the first time in years, the dust finally settles. Justice is served, but there are no parades, no medals. The files are closed, the villains are silenced, but the scars remain. Our protagonist walks away, disappearing into the morning mist, a ghost in a city that will likely forget his name by tomorrow. But as the screen fades to black, you're left with one haunting realization. The mystery wasn't about who did it, but about what we are willing to lose to find the truth. A masterpiece of urban noir that proves sometimes the only way to see the stars is to stand in the deepest shadow.